the subjective, and then you say that horrible word in scientific circles, paranormal, and things like that, well, you lose most of your audience immediately. They just turn that off, saying this doesn't mean anything, and they don't go forward. So that's a big problem. But it is not impossible. You can scientifically. When I say I describe the non-physical, I don't mean I describe it in poetry and I describe it with a lot of words. I mean I describe it logically and scientifically. It's a logical process. Okay. So, why am I here rather than writing science papers for scientists? That's because if I were doing a little toe, then I wouldn't be here. I'd be writing science papers and delivering them to science, forums. But this is not a little toe. This is a big toe. This has to do with the subjective and consciousness. It has to do with meaning, purpose. All these things are very important to everybody. They're not just important to physicists. They're very important to everyone. So I decided that I would kind of start by writing books that were at the level of everyone. You don't have to have any kind of prerequisites at all to read these books. They're just written for the common person. And I started there, and I figured the scientists would come along by and by, because the truth is not fragile. It is not fragile. It can take whatever. When Darwin produced his theory of evolution, he was caricatured as a monkey. And people found it ridiculous. When Einstein first got up and talked about special relativity, they thought he was ridiculous. He was laughed at as well. Said, that's silly. That couldn't possibly be that way. It doesn't make any sense. Well, 10 years later, Einstein got the last laugh because the experiments confirmed his theory. In any case, that's just the way it is. It's a slow-going thing, and rather than have this all tied up in a physics forum for the next 20 years, it's too important to do that. So here I am. Okay, next question. How did a nice physicist like me end up giving a lecture like this? Obviously, you have to have walked a little bit on the strange side, on the wild side, to get here. This is what happened to me. I just got out of graduate school, and I got my graduate degrees in physics, and did my thesis work in experimental nuclear physics. Never did work in the academic environment. Went right into the real world for a job. About 3 weeks into my first job, and my boss comes up, throws a book at me, and he says, Tom, read this. Well, when your boss says, read this, you go read it right away. So I did, and the name of the book was Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. Strange thing to throw at me, but I read it, and about another month went by, and a boss comes back, and he says, well, what did you think? And I was a little worried about the answer, and I thought maybe this was a test, but I'd only been there 3 weeks. But it wasn't. He had read it. He was very curious. I was a physicist. He wanted to know what my take was. And I told him honestly what I thought about it. I said, well, if this guy Monroe is just making all this up to sell books, he's got a good imagination. It was an interesting read. But, how do you know? If it, on the other hand, he really did experience these things, he really did do this research, he did the experiments he said he did and collected this data, if that's real, then, that's a capital, W, capital O, capital W, exclamation mark. That's exciting, because that says there's another whole part of reality that we don't know anything about. I'm a physicist. What I do is model reality. That's what physicists do. We're interested in reality and how it works. Well, if there's another whole piece of it that we don't even know about, that's a pretty exciting idea, if it's true. So my thought was, how do you ever know? You don't know whether this guy's making it up or not. Well, it turned out about 2 or 3 months later, the boss comes in and says, hey, we've located Bob Monroe. He doesn't live that far away. We're all going out to see him. Would you like to join us? Well, it couldn't have kept me away from that trip for anything. Of course I went, and it turned out at that time, Bob was just finishing building a lab. He wanted to study consciousness. The reason he wanted to study consciousness is he wanted to be respectable again. He wanted to have this turn out to be science. This just happened to him. He didn't ask for it. He didn't try to do it. There's probably some of you who have been trying to do this for a while and haven't had success, but he was trying not to do it. It scared him to death. He thought he was going insane. He couldn't not do it. It just happened. So he worked with it. He experimented with it. And then he realized, hey, this is real, because he could go get information that he had no access to otherwise, and he could check on it, and sure enough, that was right. And he did a lot of this experiment to where he realized that he wasn't insane. He was doing something that was way off the beaten track, but it was real. Okay, he was looking for scientists at that time to man his lab, actually to create it. All he had was an empty building. So myself and my friend Dennis Minerick, we shot our hands up and said, yes, we'll be your scientists, we'll build your equipment, we'll do your protocols, we'll make sure that the results are credible, and we won't charge you a penny for all that. What we want is for you to teach us to do what you do, because we didn't think that we could really understand it from the outside. We thought we had to experience it so that we knew what was going on. So there wasn't anybody slipping anything tricky on us, you know, there wasn't any con going on. If we were doing it ourselves, then we would believe it ourselves. It's that sort of thing. You have to get personally involved. So Bob took us up on it, and for the next 5 years or so, we spent 20 to 30 hours a week with Bob Monroe. About a third of that time we were building equipment, setting up his lab, coming up with protocols, working to generate the tools that he would need. The other 2/3 of it, Bob was teaching us what he knew. Okay, after we mastered out-of-body experience, we were doing all these things, doing experiments. Of course, every experiment had to have some evidential thing. There wasn't point in doing something that you couldn't then go back and prove that what you had done actually did happen. You must collect evidence as you go. If you don't collect evidence as you go, you'll never know what you're doing. You'll never know whether what you're experiencing is real or whether you're just have a good imagination and you're making it up. So you have to do science. Now the question might come up, can you do science in the subjective, or is science only limited to the objective? Well, most of your scientists would say it's only limited to the objective, but that's because they're not thinking very broadly. We do science in the subjective realm all the time. Generally we do it with statistics. The example I'll give you is you have a headache, you take a pill. Your headache goes away. Well, did the pill take the headache away, or did the headache just go away anyway and the pill was irrelevant? Well, it's impossible to do that as an objective experiment, because you cannot both take the pill and not take the pill at the same time. It's impossible. Can't be done objectively. Well, how do you solve the problem? You solve the problem by giving 100 people or 1,000 people with a headache the pill. Now you can find out whether or not the pill really works or not, because all 1,000 aren't going to just happen to have it go away right after they took the pill, and well, that was just circumstance. If you get that kind of a result, then you know the pill is working. Well, that's how pharmaceuticals find out whether their drugs work or not, right? That's the only way they can do that. That's the only way most medicine works. That's the way almost all of psychology works when it does its research. They do it by inference from statistics. It's not deductive logic, it's inductive logic, and it comes out with scientific results. You have to do this the same way. You can't just try to heal someone with your mind and then they get better and say, oh, I can heal people with my mind. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. You need to heal 1,000 people. And you need to keep statistics on how many of them get better when you do that. How many get better right afterwards. You may have to do 2,000 people if you're not sure. You do it until you've collected enough data that you can say that you are having an effect and that your effect is real. Well, actually what you're saying is that your effect is likely. Your effect is probable. You can say it's